So, good morning or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're tuning in from. This is our Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank's Zoom meeting during Infrastructure Week to talk about how we can renew President Franklin Roosevelt's triumphant National Infrastructure Bank with a new bank that will build our country's crumbling infrastructure, put people to work in great paying jobs, and solve our economic woes all at the same time. I am joined here with my dear friend. My name is Alfeka Mutardi. I am a macroeconomist. I worked for 25 years at the International Monetary Fund, and now I'm the chief economist on this National Infrastructure Bank proposal and also on the NIB board. And I am joined here today with my good friend, Stephen Fenberg, award-winning author of a book called Unprecedented Power, which describes how FDR and Jesse Jones implemented the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which got us out of the Great Depression and won World War II, and also is described in a great documentary by Walter Cronkite called Brother, Can You Spare Me a Billion? Referring to the inputs that were used by the RFC and the government to get us out of the Great Depression. And then also how we tooled up to win World War II, so that we're now still a free nation on that account. So I would like to I'm going to let Stephen start out and talk about the history of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. We shorten it for RFC. And what it did, how he did it, and what a great model it is for today. And then I'm going to talk about where we are on the state of the economy, how we're in crisis like we were then, and how a new piece of legislation in Congress can recreate the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. And again, rebuild all our crumbling infrastructure, put people in great paying jobs, and restore our economic base. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Stephen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alfeka. I was looking back at some of my earlier presentations to the National Infrastructure Bank, and I realized I started off everyone saying how happy I was to talk about the RFC. And it's true because looking back at the past, at successes from the past, for strategies for today, it gives me hope and it does make me happy. So I'm very glad to be here tonight to talk again about the Reconstruction Finance Corporation and how it can be used as a model for today. Interestingly, the RFC, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, was started by a Republican president, Herbert Hoover, who was just loath to use the government to address the calamity of the Great Depression. He once said that using legislation to improve the economy would be like using a law to stop a hurricane. But finally, by 1932, his last year in office, he realized the federal government was the only agency large enough and powerful enough to address the calamity of the Great Depression. And he started the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to make loans to insurance companies, banks, and railroads, thinking that would restore confidence and get the wheels of the economy to turn again. He appointed a bipartisan board, and one of the Democrats he appointed was Jesse Jones. I'm his biographer. Jesse Jones was a capitalist, a businessman, and the preeminent developer of Houston during the first half of the 20th century. And he would later say about Hoover's RFC, and I say this because it's so important to get these perspectives as we grapple with the role of government today. He gave Hoover credit for starting the RFC, but he said it was entirely too timid and slow and a year too late, and said if $3 or $4 billion, these are 1932 dollars, had been judiciously loaned in 1931 and 1932, the worst of the Great Depression would have been completely avoided. But he does give credit to Hoover for starting the RFC. And some historians even say the New Deal started with Hoover and the RFC because it was the first of the so-called alphabet agencies of the New Deal. When Franklin Roosevelt was inaugurated, he didn't disband the RFC because it had been started by another administration. He realized its potential and he appointed Jesse Jones as its chairman. And they both understood it was credit that was needed in the economy to get the wheels to turn again. The first thing the RFC did was to buy preferred stock in banks to recapitalize them so they could lend again. TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program to 2008, was modeled exactly on what Jones and FDR had done in 1933 to save the banks. Now, it's important to realize that in 1933, 25% of the nation was unemployed. The banks, when Roosevelt was inaugurated, were closed. There was no financial system. Everything had collapsed. It was an emergency. So they took the RFC, they started, buying preferred stock in banks to recapitalize them so they could lend again, thinking by making loans out into the economy, it would revitalize everything and things would start to work again. Unfortunately, the bankers were shell-shocked and they did not want to let go of this money and they would not lend it out. So Roosevelt and Jones once again said, if you won't lend this money, the government will have to step in as the lender of last resort. And that's what the Reconstruction Finance Corporation did. And that's when it really took off. It saved hundreds of thousands of homes, farms, banks, and businesses. It financed the latest in high-speed train. It built new water systems for municipalities around the nation, something that's so vitally needed today. And here's one of it also built roads, aqueducts, tunnels, all throughout the nation. But here's my favorite example because I think it's so relevant today. In the 1930s, only 20% of the people in rural areas had power. 80% had no electricity. So the RFC, through the Rural Electrification Administration, spread electricity throughout the nations by collaborating with utility companies, cities, and establishing cooperatives so that they could get electricity wherever it was needed. I'm seeing a little message on my screen, so I'm not sure. I hope I'm still coming across. Anyway, and then as well, it established the Electric Home Farm Administration so that it could help people buy appliances who were cash strapped and they could plug into the modern age. And they did all of this on credit. And it worked. People were able to go into their local Main Street store and buy refrigerators, fans, radios, lights, and they could plug into the modern age. It increased productivity, increased health, and all of these programs made money for the federal government at the same time. And that's what I think is so captivating about the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the nation's infrastructure bank during its most critical period economically. These programs worked. By 1936, after Roosevelt had been in office for 4 years, unemployment dropped 8%. Industrial output doubled, and Detroit was putting out more cars in 1936 than it had in 1929. I want to go back to the REA and the EHFA, the Electric Home Farm Authority, because those two examples to me are what can be adapted today to address our own daunting challenges. Just like the REA spread electricity throughout the nation and the EHFA helped people buy appliances to plug into the modern age, those exact same strategies can be used to expand and fortify the electric grid, to help people retrofit their homes and their buildings so they're storm resistant, energy efficient, and wired for the digital age. These programs worked. The economy was churning again. People were finding jobs. Lives were improving. And all the while, war was spreading throughout Europe. and the United States was completely unprepared. It's hard to imagine. In 1939, the U.S. military ranked 17th in size in the world. But Roosevelt had the RFC in his back pocket because he could not get Congress to act because of neutrality acts that forbid the United States from supporting warring nation, and because 80% of the people back then were opposed to intervention unless the United States was directly attacked. So Roosevelt turned to Jesse Jones and said, "You go to Congress and see what you can get done," because by then everybody loved Jesse Jones. They called him Uncle Jess throughout the nation. The RFC by then had made loans to every congressional district within the United States of America and had improved lives for everybody. So Jesse Jones went to Congress, pleaded his case, and Congress gave him what he would later call the dictionary in June 1940. And that was enabled the United States to convert from 17th in size militarily to becoming the arsenal of democracy. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation built the enormous plants that would manufacture the tanks, trucks, ships, and airplanes required to fight and win World War II. We had maybe 2,500 airplanes at that time, and they were mostly left over from World War I. Roosevelt wanted 50,000 airplanes to be built every year, and that's exactly what the RFC was able to do. And here again, it's also relevant today as we look at our issues that we're confronting, such as the need for strategic materials and rare earth minerals. The RFC built the first tin smelter in the Western Hemisphere in collaboration with the Dutch. They built enormous plants to manufacture, mine, and create magnesium, aluminum, steel. They built plants to manufacture high octane gas to fuel the airplanes they were building. They cornered the market in silk and wool for parachutes and uniforms. Everything they did was comprehensive. And that is the model for today, to look at how it did, what it accomplished, and how it was done, because we need those same strategies today in order to move forward in our world as we have it now. I think one of the most amazing feats of accomplishments that is again relevant today is this development of synthetic rubber from the lab to mass production, right when the Japanese took our supply of natural rubber, which is what we relied on to field the armed forces for the tires that were required for the trucks and the airplanes. If they had not proactively started manufacturing synthetic rubber in the late 1930s, early 40s, the Allied forces probably would have been stuck in place and unable to fight. When the last synthetic rubber plant was sold in the early 1950s, I think it was, and it was also that effort was managed by Senator Lyndon Johnson. The New York Times wrote the synthetic rubber initiative was second only to the atomic energy initiative, and it made money for the federal government through the sale of the plants and the materials. So this is all to say, we have done these great things before. During the Great Depression, these massive efforts that built infrastructure were paid for through what the RFC did, through interest, through dividends, and there was no need to raise taxes or debt, federal debt, during this period of time. So we can do these great things again. They were all done before, but it requires two things. We must embrace the power of good government and see it as something patriotic. And we need a leader in charge of the RFC who will keep his or her eye both on the common good and on the bottom line. Thank you so much. Alfecca, it's all yours.
There we go. Sorry. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was just wonderful. And it was a succinct a description of what the RFC did. I'm going to show you a few of the data points that show the impact of the RFC on the economy. But really qualitatively, you hit the nose on the head with your summary that we need to, we have examples of where government can do the right thing, can rebuild the economy, and we really need something like an off-budget bank to finance these projects because financing is the big problem. So I would like to describe to you, to our audience, where we are with an initiative in Congress today. Sorry, I'm having trouble pulling up my slides. Gosh. Apologies. There we go. I didn't hit the right button. So not only was the RFC a wonderful example of how we can rebuild the American economy, but there are three others as well. Starting, we have had four large infrastructure banks in our nation's history, starting after the American Revolutionary War, going through FDR's RFC. They were so successful. They built things like our first manufacturing center after we won the Revolutionary War from the British in Paterson, New Jersey, because we had to wean ourselves off of being an agricultural colony and start manufacturing ourselves. The Second Bank of the United States, for example, built railroads and the canal system. The banking system, which used the same financing mechanism as these earlier banks, built the Transcontinental Railroad. We would never have, and large water projects too, and we would never have movement to the West and big infrastructure projects that would support new development in the West without these banks. And even the Reconstruction Finance Corporation built things like the whole Colorado River system, which provides electric power to 7 states and 40 million customers, and water that goes all the way down the Colorado River into California, into Arizona. And by the way, now Arizona is having a big water crisis, back in drought again. And that puts a lot of our food production into jeopardy. So we've had 4 successful banks. They aren't around anymore because their charters timed out. The same thing happened to the RFC after the end of World War II. But they were very successful. All of them made money for the government. They grew the economy in times of crisis where our budgets had no money, our debt was high, and we were able to grow out of our debt predilections because of the existence of these banks. And I would point out that other countries around the world use our model. They call all of these banks the American system, and they have permanent banks in place to finance their infrastructure. So we need a 5th bank. And the good news is we have a bill in Congress. In the last session, it was numbered HR 4052. What the bill does is it creates a $5 trillion public bank to lend for infrastructure projects all across the country. The reason we need this bank is because we have not been investing in infrastructure, and our unfunded gap for infrastructure is expanding very alarmingly so. This bank will again be the lender of last resort after the federal government puts in its money for infrastructure, after private state and local governments put in their money for infrastructure, the private capital money markets put in their money for infrastructure. This bank will top up as a lender of last resort all the rest of the financing that's not being financed today. So our Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank has been assisting the main sponsor of this bill, Congressman Danny Davis of Illinois, helping him to get new sponsors onto the bill. We've gotten a lot of support from state and local legislators who are very aware of our infrastructure needs and the unfunded gaps. And then collectively, we go to their members of Congress and ask them to sign on. And this bill had a lot of momentum. A lot of the signers signed on after the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law was passed, and they saw, even though it was a great start, it was too small. And they were signing onto the bill even up to the last day of the session. So Congressman Davis is getting ready to reintroduce. We're helping him to build support, and you can even help because this is a grassroots campaign. You can even help to get your members of Congress on board to this bill. I want to describe quickly how the bank works off budget to finance all of the infrastructure that we need. Actually, this bank, this structure of the bank is designed to operate just like any commercial lending bank. And what that means is that to open the doors, we need to get it adequately capitalized. That's money that the owners of the bank insert into the bank in order to backstop the loans in case the economy goes bad or anything like that. To do this capitalization, we use Alexander Hamilton's method for the first bank of the United States, go to the private market who are holding about $29 trillion in treasuries, US treasuries, all around the world. And we ask would they like to sell in a small portion of them into the NIB exchange for preferred stock that'll pay these private investors a little bit extra on their dividend yields compared to the treasuries they hold. And that stream of money comes out of interest earnings from the NIB's loans, with plenty of money left over to meet the bank's other operational needs. And what this means is that this bank is self-sustaining. It does not require infusions from the federal budget to capitalize or run its operations over time. So no new taxes, no new debt on the federal budget side on account of this bank. Then the bank goes on to give out a loan just like any commercial bank. Uses the same accounting software, banking rules, actually creates money each time it gives out a loan. All commercial banks operate that way, and this bank is no different. And then the loan terms are great for the borrowers. Lowest interest rates around, flexible repayment terms, and borrowers, all of this is defined in the bill. Borrowers would be state and local governments, any public entity that owns a bit of public infrastructure, a county, a city, a housing authority, a transportation authority can come in directly to the NIB and ask for a loan. So the NIB covers $5 trillion in loans over 10 years in 20 hard infrastructure categories. 16 of those categories routinely monitored by the American Society of Civil Engineers. We use their estimates, their independent estimates on how much extra money is needed in order to repair all of our transportation systems, water systems, upgrade the electric power grid. We added on 4 categories we also think are critical: a complete high-speed rail network all around the country, broadband everywhere, affordable housing, 7 million units targeted to the very lowest income earners who need them the most, and then some large-scale water projects in areas where we grow our nation's food and they're running out of water. So not only can we fix infrastructure, but we can address what I think as an economist is our economic and structural real economy crisis. We need to raise effectively economic growth to be much better than it has been recently. And just to give you an example, here is our rate of growth in adjusting for inflation since 1900 out to 2024. And if you do the math, what you see is during the period of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which effectively got up and running in 1933, right here, and right here, and then, right here, and then, got us out of the Depression, tooled up the country to produce more, through the accomplishments in World War II, the mobilizations, and then left an afterglow after that, so that during the period of the RFC, the economy grew on average, despite all these ups and downs, by 5% on average. Compare that to the last 20 years, for example. You can see that this overall thing is higher at around 5%, and lately on the last 20 years, it's only been an average of 2.1%. So this is the accomplishment of investing in the real economy, which is what the RFC did. So again, it built Hoover, Parker, Imperial dams on the Colorado River, Bonneville on the Columbia River, the Lincoln Tunnel, the Tennessee Valley Authority, schools, hospitals, electrification of 90% of rural America, raised productivity. This was the key right here, because with higher productivity, you can produce more with fewer inputs like labor and capital. And the new supply of goods was stimulated by demand for the construction, like steel, cement, equipment. Private spending by businesses and workers also rose. And compare that to without the RFC. That's this period over here. And what these last 20 years really accentuate is that our economy shifted into a financialization period. We were no longer investing, even businesses were no longer investing in the real economy. They were really investing and borrowing from banks to invest in speculation, which didn't raise GDP growth. What it raised was asset prices on the stock market. And it increased income inequality as well. So compare that to today's sort of ideology about how we grow the economy. That mantra says, let's cut the budget and let's lower taxes. Because when you lower taxes, then businesses have more money to invest in the economy. But as I just explained, they didn't invest in the economy, they invested in the stock market. And cutting taxes had a very bad effect on the economy. You can read, if you're really a bookworm, you can read a book called Austerity, the history of this very dangerous idea by Mark Blythe. And you can see in this graph what happens when you cut the economy. Even though the RFC was getting up and going here and raising employment and building things all over the place, in 1933, FDR made one mistake. He listened to the deficit hawks and seriously slashed government spending, even though the RFC was slashed government spending, and we dipped into a recession. So that shows you the effect that cutting the budget can have. And then he ramped spending back up again, and then went into World War II mode. And the reason that the economy turned into negativity was when the war ended and all the troops came home. So these are factors that affect growth, but overall, economic modeling shows that this idea of investing in the economy really works even today in conditions of full employment. It shows that every dollar you invest in public infrastructure creates $3 new in domestic production in the economy. And that's where we need to head so that we can grow our way out of our huge national debt. Where are we on the debt? We're doing very, very badly. The US debt now stands at $37 trillion, far exceeding the size of our yearly gross domestic production. 80% of that debt is held outside by private savers. That's that $29 trillion that we want to use to capitalize our National Infrastructure Bank, plenty of that around. These annual deficits today, under today's laws, are expected to add another $2 trillion per year over the next 10 years. And if we pass the tax cut act that's being proposed, that'll add on another $3.9 trillion onto that. So plans to ramp up the cuts on budgeted infrastructure spending will lead to negative growth. We could slip into a recession, and we don't want to go there. Meanwhile, our nation's infrastructure is crumbling. The American Society of Civil Engineers just came out with their new report card, and this is the thing that is being addressed in Infrastructure Week, but not adequately in our view. ASCII comes out with a report on the infrastructure every 4 years, did their last one in 2021. What it showed is that in those last 4 years, the unfunded gap for infrastructure grew by an additional 40%, up to $3.9 trillion. The National Infrastructure Bank will cover all of that unfunded gap, especially where it rose the most for energy, drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, roads and bridges, and schools. So even though the report card grade went up, the gap has grown larger, and there is no proposal around that we see other than this off-budget bank to finance infrastructure. And to show how serious this crumbling infrastructure can be, here is a cargo ship striking the Key Bridge in Maryland, in Baltimore, Maryland, and Baltimore's a big, huge port that brought the whole bridge down. If only we had good investments in infrastructure, we could have built barriers around the support piers for this bridge, and it wouldn't have collapsed. And there are 68 other bridges around the United States that face the same risks. Our latest emergency concerns our nation's antiquated air traffic control system. We've had now outages in Newark, and there's another place too. I forgot where it is. But I don't know about you, but I'm a little bit concerned about getting on an airplane and coming in for a landing into the United States. This is not acceptable. The longer we wait, the higher the financing gaps becomes. So we need immediate action on this. Then there is the problem of our nation's pay structure and where the economy is going. The one beauty of Jesse Jones is that he knew that construction projects were the best way to put people back to work in those days, but also to put people into great paying jobs. And the National Infrastructure Bank will direct this credit, just like the RFC did, to the general welfare, which is provision in the U.S. Constitution. It'll build housing, power, efficient transportation, clean water, broadband connectivity. It'll retain public ownership in these important things that infrastructure areas that need to be protected from excessive profit taking by private sector. It doubles economic GDP growth and productivity. It solves our wage gap. We have huge income inequality today, and much of it was driven by the fact that banks and investors started switching away from investing in the real economy and into the financial to seeking higher yields. It makes America make again, to borrow a phrase. Let's manufacture, let's grow businesses, productivity, the economy, and the real sector, and vastly stimulates production and supply. So with that, I'm going to open up for the audience for questions and answers. I would love for Stephen to pitch in and chime in on some of those. I have a couple of questions for him before we open it up to the audience. We've turned off the chat, I think, so that we can focus, better on the presentations. But I hope you've saved up some of your questions for Stephen. And Stephen, I would love to ask you one first of all. One of my favorite things in your book is this cartoon right here on page 290. I think this is awesome, but it shows you how aware of where investments were going back in the center of the Great Depression. And the picture shows Jesse Jones at a bank teller's window handing out a bag of money to the railroads and advising them, don't give this money over to the bankers and the bondholders and everything like that. Use it to better invest in new trains, new rail, improvements in service, because that's what we really need. So I would love you to comment on how he did that. I mean, when you talk about all the things that he built, I mean, he knew construction in mind, and he knew big projects in order to really get a lot of bang for your buck. So how did he select them? I understood he made some of these deals just with a handshake. So could you comment on that?
Well, he was a master at using credit, and he knew good business. And when the RFC made loans to, let's say, a major railroad, it came with provisions. The stockholders, the owner of the railroad, would have to reduce his salary to no more than the President of the United States. They balked at that. Even Roosevelt said, no, that's not enough. They won't be able to maintain their yachts and mansions. So they upped it up a little bit, but they had to reduce their salaries. They could not pay dividends to stockholders until the loans were repaid. And if a railroad owner, the railroad was in California and the railroad owner was living in New York so he could be next to his Wall Street banker, he was required to move to California where his railroad existed. So there were always qualifications with these loans. You couldn't just come to the RFC and get a loan. You had to do something in order to earn it. And these loans were all repaid. That's what's so important, that all of the loans that the RFC made were repaid with interest. And that's how the federal government was able to do these massive projects with no new federal taxes or debt. I want to refer to your graph, which I just love. I thought that was so interesting because it shows how things worked. That recession occurred in 1937 because, as you said, Roosevelt listened to the deficit hawks and stopped lending. I mean, stopped spending, but he also stopped lending. He told Jesse Jones, stop making loans. And the economy tanked. It was too soon. But the first thing Roosevelt did to restore the economy again was to tell Jesse Jones to start making loans to the RFC, that he understood that was the key to economic growth. It wasn't more spending, it was more lending to the companies that were making jobs and creating things. I failed to make a point about World War II that I think is also very important. So, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, through one of its subsidiaries, Defense Plant Corporation, built these massive factories, to manufacture the planes, the trucks, the airplanes. But they leased them to corporations to operate. They didn't do it themselves, they leased them to corporations to operate. So, when anybody starts talking about government service as socialism, I always say, how do you think we won World War II? The government built the plants that were required to manufacture everything that was needed to win World War II and leased them to corporations to operate. But here's the important point, going back to your graph. Yes, it dipped down right after World War II, but if you notice, it went right back up because everything that the federal government had built and owned, and it owned the majority, like 70% of the aviation industry, 100% of the rubber industry, the vast majority of the metals industry. It sold all of what it owned back into the private sector. And that's what expanded the middle class and allowed the economy to grow like it did in the 1950s, the 1960s, up until the 1970s, when a president started to say, our government is the enemy. And that's when things started to turn around. So I wanted to make sure to make those 2 points.
Great point. And also the foundation for what it did in World War II, which was to transform the tool die industry, to standardize things, because you can't have different plants producing different things different ways, which allowed at the end of the World War II, when they sold all the stuff back, for things like auto production or for war production to shift over really quickly into producing automobiles, washing machines, and those other kind of things. It was fast and
Yeah.
put all the GIs back to work at the same time.
Right. And what you're referring to is machine tools,
Yeah.
which is one of the first things the RFC did as it was mobilizing for World War II, because it realized you have to have drills and saws and gauges to massively produce things. Otherwise, everything has to be handmade. So that, again, everything the RFC did was comprehensive. It wasn't just piece by piece by piece. They saw the whole picture. And that's why we won World War II.
Exactly. And that afterglow from what the RFCs lasted a long time into the 60s and up to the
Yeah,
70s. It
exactly.
was a big
Exactly.
boost. That's why we have not only 5% growth during the RFC, but afterwards as well.
And that's why we need to embrace the power of good government.
And why also we need a permanent bank. We should have learned the lesson.
Yeah,
If we had the RFC still in place across all since World War II, we would have much more money for public investments and it wouldn't be deteriorating right now.
right, right. I agree.
So thank you, audience, for listening. And please, if anybody else has some questions, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. Any questions?
Uh, Here's a question from the coalition.
Mhm.
Could you please explain how the RFC helped us restart the banking system and also the impact on the municipal bond market and cities and states to begin to rebuild and how that might pertain to today?
Well, I kind of referred to that at the beginning when the first thing the RFC did under Roosevelt was to buy preferred stock in banks. And Jesse Jones simply called it the bank repair program. Unlike, in 2008, we called it the troubled asset relief program. He was much more direct and called it the bank repair program. And by buying preferred stock in banks, it recapitalized them. It gave them money to lend rather than giving them loans to put them further back into debt. It bought preferred stock in banks to recapitalize them. And eventually, all that stock was bought back by the banks, and it didn't cost the federal taxpayers a dime. And it saved the United States banking system when it had completely collapsed and all the banks in the nation were closed. Now, as far as municipal bonds, that one maybe Alfecca can address better than I can.
So actually, I'm just quoting the others that the bond market, as I understand it, the banks complained about the RFC taking their business away, and so did the bond market. But Jesse Jones told them, "Look, if you want to lend for any of these projects, go ahead and lend. We're fine. We are the lender of last resort. If you're not going to do it, we're going to do it." But the truth is that this stimulated investments by private businesses and by banks because the offshoot business from building the Hoover Dam made new business for companies. And the bond market actually was stimulated and rose. Now, the bond market today is in trouble. We are in trouble because, as Walt McCree, who's on this call, can testify, one of the things that might be cut in the budget is the tax deduction for holding on the interest on municipal bonds. If that tax deduction goes away, investors will no longer invest in those municipal bonds. It could be a big blow, a much bigger blow. There's been a big lobbying campaign about it. And in addition, the bond market is still not providing enough money. It's one of the three sources for building infrastructure today. It's not providing enough money. It's been flat. The whole loans for bonds have been flat at $4 trillion for the last 15 years. And some of the banks are getting out of the business. Citicorp announced last year that it's going to get out of the bond business because it's not making enough money. So they can make more elsewhere. And so altogether, this will stimulate business for banks by the indirect business activity that comes off of the construction that the NIB lends for. Walt, do you want to add on to that?
Well, hi, Alfecca, and hi, Stephen. Nice to see you. I just wanted to ask you about the resistance that we're finding at the legislative level, where many of the people we've talked to at the congressional level seem to be kind of, they have their infrastructure plans, their legislation, but the big banks seem to really be the blockade on moving this thing forward. Would you agree with that there's a Wall Street blockade against this innovation or this approach?
Well, we haven't seen as much pushback as FDR got on the. I don't think so. First of all, they're mired in their own drama having to do with the tariff increases that led to a crash in the stock market. That's where all of their investing is going. It's hit people's 401ks. That's their attention center right now. Even before that happened, however, we got some good press. For example, the main magazine for the bond market is called The Bond Market, and they did 2 reviews on the National Infrastructure Bank, and they had good things to say about it. So we think we can make a good case for them based on the history of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation that this new proposal for a national infrastructure bank will be good for banks and bond markets.
Thank you.
And I want to add something about banks, because Jesse Jones and the RFC always gave banks first chance to do something. If they could not step up, the RFC had to. But it was their intention that the bank should always have first choice, or businesses should have first chance. The private sector should be there. And Jesse Jones would go to the American Bankers Association's meeting every year and said, you've got to start lending. If you don't start lending, the RFC will continue to do it. And he would give examples of loans the RFC had made that the banks had turned down, that the RFC had done and made money on. But they were just so reluctant to let go of their money. They were afraid. I think that was part of it because of what they had just experienced. But the RFC, as I'm sure the infrastructure bank, as we are proposing it now, always gave the private sector first chance to participate.
And this is codified in our new bill. It says that the NIB will be the lender of last resort. So we'll use the same technique. Go to the banks. So,
Let me, if I may just add one point. The other thing that I think we're finding the
Andy,
biggest.
go ahead and introduce yourself for.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Andy Winnick. I'm also a macroeconomist on the advisory board for the NIB. Was on the research staff of the President's Council of Economic Advisors for a while, and on the research staff of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Most of my career was in academia. What I was going to say is, I think we haven't found a way to address adequately, and I'm not sure we can, is that the big resistance from the Republicans in Congress, and maybe even from some of the Democrats, is a loss of control. That if they are writing the legislation, they can write the control for each, or they're putting in the money. They can control where the money goes, how it goes, what stands behind it, and so forth. If they turn it over to the bank is going to then do the decisions about which loans get made, which loans don't get made. And the bank will have the way it's written, we're proud of this, will have a back office of technical people with engineering experience and project experience to actually manage the things. So you don't get things as examples, repaving a highway and 2 weeks later tearing it up to put a water system under it. This sort of coordination. I don't know quite how we convince the politicians to let go of that sense of control that they have of writing each piece of legislation, funding what gets funded and so forth. That's a problem, and I'm not quite sure how we get past it.
Well, in my view, we can make a case. First of all, we can make the case that in discussing the bill and making modifications to the bill, everybody has a say-so on what the bank is going to invest in. Nobody that I've talked to in the last 5 years has said that they question our infrastructure needs as defined by the American Society of Civil Engineers. It's water, it's roads, it's bridges, it's all those things we talked about. And the size of it, nobody has questioned the size either. This is infrastructure bank. Everybody's pointed to the 2025 report card, the shocking increase in the size of the unfunded gap. And this is a lender of last resort. So they all have input there. We don't want to politicize infrastructure, that's for sure. And today it's being politicized. There's no reason to try and kill all of the Obama's bipartisan infrastructure law. Now, 90% of what's left of it is being the appropriations and the sending out of money to contract is being blocked. We want a dependable, you must have a dependable long-term source of financing, because if you start, you can't build half of a bridge. And then if you do that and you don't finish it, you only escalate the costs. They have big cost overruns. So this is to avoid cost overruns and that kind of thing. We need to have a reliable long-term source of financing and good coordinated planning. So these are all things that have been emphasized, and they will bring new production and new economic benefits to every single district in the country. So all those are all things that we can stress with Congress members, but first and foremost, this will pick up it complements what's being done in the budget. It doesn't compete with it or reduce it or take away anybody's power. What they're doing now, they continue doing, and then the NIB picks up the slack. So I think we can make a good argument. What do you think, Andy?
No, I agree.
I want to add something to that too.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can only use the RFC and Jesse Jones as a model,
Great.
but in answer to your question, leadership. It's going to take leadership that everybody can trust. That may be a tough nut to crack, but in the 1930s and the 1940s, the RFC and Jesse Jones were embraced by the left, by the right, by Republicans, by Democrats. And the country knew Jesse Jones as Uncle Jess. They trusted him. The most conservative Republican in Congress, Robert Taft, even said, he has unprecedented power, but he deserves it because of the kind of human being he is. So, number one, that's why it's called unprecedented power. Uh, and that's why James Baker endorsed the cover of the book with two Democrats on the cover. Um, so, number one, it's leadership that we can trust and respect. And number two, just like the RFC operating in a goldfish bowl. The RFC was completely transparent. It reported everything that it did. Jesse Jones was in the news constantly in magazines and newspapers, on the radio. This was before TV. And he always recited three figures: how much the RFC had loaned, how much it had been paid back, and how much it had to devote to Roosevelt's spending programs, because the RFC was so successful through its lending programs, it had extra money to support the spending programs, which Jesse Jones kind of resented, and that's why he used the third figure. But in answer to your question, we need good leadership and transparency.
Alfecca, there's another question, Randy Voller.
Yes, Randy, and say where you're from, who you are, where you're from, and pose your question.
Yes, hi, Stephen. I'm from North Carolina. As former chair of our state party, served 4 terms as mayor of our community. And of course, I have a lot of experience in the private sector. I have a couple questions. First, one comment. I read your book, which is a tremendous work. I really enjoyed it. Found it quite interesting, kind of a different era of political leader as our country's growing. I think one difference we have now that did not exist there politically was the parties were more entangled and more purple, where you had Democrats. Jesse Jones comes from the Texas conservative Southern Democrat model that you don't have anymore, where you had Republicans up until probably this, the 70s or 80s that might be to the left of some Democrats. And now we have this sorting out where it's a little trickier to get these things done because you don't have that connection. We wouldn't have gotten the Civil Rights Act, for instance, without Republicans and Democrats voting because of the phenomenon I'm mentioning. But what I'm really curious about is what, in your mind, actually changed at the end of the Eisenhower administration for why they let the charter go, and why in the great, in the new frontier, Kennedy and then LBJ didn't want to pick up on those ideas, even though they still had new dealers that were still in the federal government and still advisors. I'm quite aware, having grown up in the 70s and 80s, what occurred, but I'm just curious, in your research, was it that they just decided we're going to change the model, or there was some form of resistance, or do you even have, or is there a clear answer to that?
I'll try to give you an answer, because Jesse Jones himself thought that the RFC had outlived its useful purpose by the end of World War II. And the RFC, after he left as chairman, kind of fell into disrepute. It was making questionable loans that he never, ever would have made. So I think that's one reason why its authority and its respect diminished. The Small Business Administration was kind of the offshoot of the RFC, and I think that the SBA still has got potential. But I think that, that's the best answer I can give you. It fell into disrepute. Jesse Jones himself said it's outlived its useful purpose, which was part of the RFC ethic. If something is done and it's been accomplished, we should disband it. It doesn't need to last in perpetuity. Just like the Electric Home Farm Authority I had mentioned. It had helped more than 1 million families buy appliances by 1943, and it was no longer needed. And so it was liquidated. And Jesse Jones said, and it made a tidy profit for the United States government. But I think that because the RFC kind of fell into disrepute in the 50s, Jesse Jones was no longer in leadership. He felt like it had outlived its useful purpose, because all of this massive investment had been transferred to the private sector and the middle class was growing. And I don't want to be naive, but I keep going back to this idea that we have to embrace the power of good government and quit thinking that government is our enemy. Jesse Jones said in 1937, in one of his many speeches about economic recovery, It cannot occur if we allow ourselves to believe that our government is our enemy. So I really think it takes a big shift in our attitude about the role of government in our lives. That's my answer to that. And I now have to ask you, where in North Carolina?
So I'm in the Raleigh-Durham area, so I'm right south of Chapel Hill.
Well, I asked because my mother was born in Brooklyn, but during the Great Depression, her family moved to Rocky Mount.
Oh, I know Rocky Mount. It's a
Okay.
well-known place, yeah. It's right on 95. So I think that's a great answer. I really appreciate that because I've often wondered what exactly happened because it seemed like it could have kept going, but that explains to me the why.
It
And
really wasn't, I don't think, as needed as it was during the Great Depression and World War II, but we need it now. It's time to bring it back.
so
And
I posted your quote on my Facebook, by the way, about I served 4 terms in local government, and I agree with you completely. The role of government in our lives is important, and to make it the boogeyman constantly is a disservice. And so I took your quote and put it on my Facebook, and
Thank you. I'm honored, and thank you for your comment about my book. That really means a lot to me.
well, it's a great book. It's a
Thank
long
you.
book, but I've read it, so thank you.
Thank
And
you.
Randy, if I could point out to Stephen's remark of why we need it today, could you describe what happened in Hurricane Helene that ran up $50 billion worth of damage, and now we don't have a national infrastructure bank to fix those dams? Next time we have a big surge in rainfall, it's going to do the same thing again. And legislators in your area have said, let the private sector fix it. And will they fix it?
No, I think one of the challenges you get is that they're doing this with Medicaid, by the way, where they often said, don't expand it because government will cut it and we'll be stuck with the mandate, except they never said that the people cutting it are the same people running the legislature in Raleigh, meaning there's a philosophical bent here. And the problem we have now that you get, well, let's kick it upstairs, then we're going to kick it downstairs. But there's no money, there's no ability to bond. We could float a state bond, but we don't. So there is no access to capital, public or private, to address this. You need a bank like this, something a much bigger idea to get involved and actually move the needle. And I work in the infrastructure world, Stephen, so I'm quite familiar with the concept, which I used to tell my elected officials. If you keep kicking the can just gets bigger because costs in construction world invariably do not go down. We might have a deflationary cycle like in '08, but then immediately they'll go up again. And right now they're at historic highs after the pandemic.
It look-
Yeah,
it looks like John Paul has a question, Alphecca.
Yes, absolutely. John Paul, you want to come on camera, say who you are, and ask your question.
Okay, so I'm Jean Paul Thomas, and I'm out of Chicago, and we just went through an electrical storm where trees took down power lines where I am. So I'm working with limited capacity. I'm going to check out your book, Stephen. I don't have the letters behind my names, but I'm a guy in the trenches. I deal with power issues every day. I do networking and computer systems. I've been at it for 50 years. I should retire, but hey, I won't. So, to an earlier question, time is not on our side. Okay. I happen to have capacity to live through a power outage, but that's a decision I made. That's a decision I funded. So when the 400 customers around me were without power, I had power. But I was also very smart in not flaunting it because that becomes a different set of problems. So when we got invited to PowerStack, is the company I'm starting, we got invited to participate, I wanted to listen and learn from other folks. I believe the money is there to fix the problem. So stop saying there's no money. The money is there. The problem is we need to move quickly. I am not advocating a total dismantling of regulations and stuff like that. But what I see in the National Infrastructure Bank is a faster way to move. nature doesn't care about our timetables. Nature is doing what nature does. And so the NIB, the way I understand it's to be set up, gives us a faster way to move. When I taught project management for 25 years, the problem was always surprises because we didn't really understand the problem. The problem was always cost overruns because we didn't understand the problems. And the problems was we never delivered on time because this, I think somebody earlier said, we kept kicking the can down the road. And then the can got so big, we couldn't kick it down the road anymore. So we need this strategy in order to move faster. As a person who's in the trenches dealing with these issues on a weekly and daily basis, I'm going like, what are we waiting for?
Yeah. So that's a great question, John Paul. I would point out that we learned, the lesson we learned when advising on the bill was from the RFC's execution. It was set up to quickly put people back to work and solve problems that were plaguing America, like the lack of electricity. So we also similarly in the legislation advised to put in an emergency startup clause where we could start addressing first things first, big emergencies like building those piers on bridges, like getting all of the lead service lines out of the ground immediately. They're still poisoning children. We've known about this for the last 20 years. Why not start on those projects where there's planning already done and where we have serious problems, and phase in more more long-term builds like high-speed rail or whatever. The grid is high on our radar. We've had a huge demand for electricity increases coming from data centers that are, driving artificial intelligence and sucking up all the power all around. We had this problem here in Northern Virginia. We had to bring in special lines from West Virginia run on coal. We don't have a way yet to balance the whole grid network to account for local generation from rooftops or anything like that. We don't have big lines to even bring in electricity from, we have a line of renewable energy generation, about 700 projects waiting in line because there's no room on the grid to put them on. So we don't want to have you go to you've got a backup generator, but I mean, the whole economy would have negative a contraction if they tried to turn the lights on and they didn't go on.
Well, I will tell you right now, with regard to data centers and networking, because this is in my wheelhouse.
Right.
There are solutions available right now.
Yeah.
The problem is the uncertainty of committing to a solution. Because I will tell you right now, with
From the financing side, there's uncertainty?
Well, because I have to plan for purchasing.
Yeah.
I have to plan for installation. I have to plan for training.
Yeah.
The uncertainty right now causes me to wonder about committing. So people say to me all the time, well, Jean-Paul, you don't understand because you're a small operation. I understand. The only difference is scale. Yeah. I got the same problem that the former elected officials have at a municipal level, at a city level. It's simply a question of scale. So yeah, maybe I'm only dealing with tens of thousands of dollars and you guys are dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars, but it's the same problem. Yeah. If I can't plan, if I have to commit my money, and I'm one of those original bootstrappers, okay? I didn't have bank loans. I didn't have credit cards. I earned the money and set it aside and made the business work. Yeah. And that's the way I operate. So if I have to plan for this, I need to know when I spend my $2,000 or $5,000, when am I going to get that back? How long is it going to take? Am I going to actually make any profit from that expenditure? And so when I understood the infrastructure bank, I said, oh, this may be a way for me to fund what I cannot self-fund. But in order for me to make that commitment, I need to know 6 months down the road, because the window of financing, I've talked to the banks, and the banks tell me, I'm going to do 80% of the same work. What am I going to get back?
Yeah. It's a point very well taken, and it points to the fact that to build infrastructure, small, large, the power grid, everything, we need a long-term source, a reliable long-term source for funding, and that will keep the costs down. And what we see with the government right now is that they're throwing all kinds of uncertainty into the business community, cutting back on projects that have already started or already planned, and this will be a more reliable source for planning and financing. Anybody else have a question?
I do, but I can't figure out how to raise my hand.
Up.
Oh, okay. So why don't you go ahead, start, and then I'll call on Mary after that.
Oh, well, let Mary go first.
Okay, fine. Mary Doherty, say where you're from and what your question is.
Hi, I'm from Clifton Heights. It's in Delaware County, just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And my name is said Doherty, but I wouldn't expect you to know that. Okay, so I guess my question or comment is that our political situation these days is really tricky and not good. I'm very excited by this infrastructure bank idea and how you've described how it's been used successfully throughout our history. Currently, I guess, I think, are you looking at our political situation in terms of who is going to stop this and why? And if it's the banks don't like the ideas, as Stephen was saying in the past, and Jesse Jones had to convince them, does that need to be done again or what? Because it's always sort of like, where is the power? Where is the money? That kind of thing. And I'll just stop now. If anybody wants to make any comments, I appreciate it.
So, Stephen, you want to start off with that, and then
I think you're better equipped to answer that question because I can only go back to the examples of the 1930s and the 1940s when the banks were given the option to participate, and if they did not, the RFC had no choice but to step in. I don't know if that would be a similar situation today. I think that, as you said, the new bank would certainly give the private sector first chance to do anything it could do, and then the NIB steps in. I think it would be a very similar situation to what occurred during the 1930s.
And the background for the RFC is we were in a depression. So everybody had to deal with it. In fact, all four of these banks were started when we were in an economic crisis. And don't forget, we just had a big, huge, great recession just a decade ago. And it was caused by banks overbetting on the stock market. And then the government had to bail them out, and that ratcheted up the national debt. We want to move to a different strategy where we can raise our long-term growth. We can keep construction costs down. And if there's a recession, and I think we could likely slip into one, the uncertainty that John Paul described for small businesses is everywhere. And we're going to have a hard stop on business investment. It's already started. And even it's affecting farmers, everybody. So we could when you have a contraction in the economy caused by high interest rates and fighting inflation, you have a contraction in the economy caused by the tariffs and the uncertainty, and now you're going to add on to that a contraction in the economy caused by cutting back on spending, which is not going into the real sector. They don't want to invest in the real sector in these circumstances. We could very well slip into a recession, and then you can use the NIB. Then you'll have a different attitude among legislators. It won't be this, polarization because, everybody votes on the economy. Last November, everybody voted on the economy. That was the result because people weren't taking, this economy doesn't work for most people before a recession. And during a recession, it's going to get worse. And so what they do is keep voting the party in charge out of office. We'll swing back and forth, and we won't have a solution because the economy is the base of it. So this provides an off budget. It doesn't add to the debt, national debt, and it makes money for government. It'll bring in new revenues and receipts, and it'll grow us out of the high national debt. It's the only way it's worked, and it has not worked by budget cuts. So unfortunately, it may take a catastrophic failure of our system to get this bank passed. But
And I'd like to, you mentioned a recession, the Great Recession from 2008. More recently, we had the pandemic. And every time, the government would have to come in and, let's say, bail out the airlines and say, wait a second, why aren't they making loans instead of bailouts? Why don't we have an infrastructure bank that can comprehensively address the pandemic, just like we did World War II when things were in, short supply? So the bank, as we see it today, can address things just like that occur that are unexpected, like a pandemic.
great, super. Okay, Steve Comm,
Yes,
what was your question?
Well, I'm a neighbor of Mary Doherty, and we're both from Delaware County, which is high there, which is a big suburb of Philadelphia. It's kind of like if comparing, like, say, in England, you would compare Manchester with London. Okay, we're kind of the more working class suburb of Philadelphia as opposed to some of the fancier ones. And also, it's an area that does have some historic political clout because we've decided that in our neck of the woods, the last 3 presidential elections, in fact, some people may remember years ago, Tina Fey, who's from around here, and Jimmy Kimmel, who isn't, playing the people who were going to decide the 2016 presidential election, 2 housewives from Clifton Heights. Okay, so Tina Fey was very good at doing that. Jimmy wasn't. But now, in terms of the economic weight, though, we're facing a big crisis in their area and our state because there's several huge looming problems which the state budget can't handle, and the federal government obviously is not going to be any help with its current setup, which is the rail system for the area, for the Southeast Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and the surrounding counties, is really broke, partly because of the pandemic. And they are saying if they don't get a huge amount of state help, then they're going to have to cut a whole bunch of rail service, shut off any rail service to the city of Chester, one of our big cities in the county, a bunch of other rail lines and bus lines, and raise the fares 25%. And it would increase the passenger car traffic by over 300,000 vehicles a day in Philadelphia. Just like every man, woman, and child in Pittsburgh driving to Philadelphia every day in the rush hour. And also, we have the Republicans in the other part of the state control the state senators saying, well, we don't have any money for in the state budget because the governor, Shapiro, and others want to put in the budget $1 billion to repair and replace some of the schools in the Philadelphia City School District, which needs $5 billion in new schools, and all the other school districts. Mary and I happen to be in the same school district, Upper Darby, and needs new elementary schools. They really should replace the swimming pool in the high school, but they can't. No money. Now, just in terms of precedent, Stephen, and because I know I've read a good part of your book. Not everything. I've heard you speak before. Did the RFC finance city or regional rail or transit systems, and did it finance schools? And Alfecca, if you could comment also, had the RFC finance either something like a large part of it otherwise as an operating budget for SEPTA, our regional rail system, so wouldn't have to go for begging for money to the state. Well, and we're not the only one that has a huge decrease in ridership because of the pandemic that hasn't really come back. Okay, and also same thing with school districts, whether it's Philadelphia or, Punxsutawney or wherever, big or small. Did the RFC finance these things like school construction? And how could the infrastructure bank do that? Yeah.
The RFC financed the constructions of schools throughout the nation. But as far as the railroads go, that was one of the toughest nuts for the RFC to crack. And what it did, basically, it refinanced the railroads' debt more than it did anything because they were so indebted and they were being charged exorbitant interest rates to service the debt. The RFC came in and said, we will refinance your debt at, I'm going to make up a number, 4%, whereas the banks were charging 5 and 6%. So they actually got into negotiations with the banks and said, you're more than welcome to come in and refinance this debt, but you're going to have to do it at a more reasonable interest rate. That was one of the beauties of the RFC, is that it promoted long-term, low-interest loans so that railroads could survive. And that's how it helped the railroads more than anything. And it did do a lot of construction of city halls, schools, all kinds of things for municipalities throughout the nation.
Including transit, municipal transit too?
I would not be able to tell you if it was specifically municipal, but I know that the railroads, their efforts for the railroads were comprehensive, whether they were local or national.
Okay, local too. All right.
And I would add on to that yes, schools are absolutely covered. The base of the National Infrastructure Bank is to cover 100% all of the funding gap for those 20 categories of infrastructure. And the one for schools has grown precipitously. So we want to make sure we cover all of those, and we want to cover transit systems as well. I used to work at the IMF, and one of the things that we did was to make sure that not only was an economy in a position to invest and grow the economy, but that there was financial stability. So whenever you lend to a borrower and you expect the loans to be paid back, you have to first put that borrower on a sound footing. That would include both SEPTA in Pennsylvania and the New York Metropolitan Transit Authority as well, or the one in New Jersey as well. We want to get them all on a sound footing and then make the infrastructure investments to lower costs so that they can be viable in the future. These are all good areas of planning. We will offer the lowest interest rates around, and we will help them with their financial planning and with their engineering planning as well.
Alfecca, maybe Steve wants to make a final wrap up. I think.
Yes, that'd be great. Go ahead, Stephen.
I think I've really said everything I possibly can. And I keep going back. If we want this to succeed, if we really want an infrastructure bank that will grow our economy, help all the people of the United States, we must embrace the power of good government. We need leadership that will keep its eye on the bottom line and on the common good. It's all been done before. All we need to do is look at successes from the past for strategies today.
Right. Yeah, let me make one comment that concerns me about this discussion on this aspect of it. What we're ignoring is that since the early 70s, there has been a concerted effort. This is where the Powell Memorandum came in. This is the Citizens United Supreme Court decision. This is the creation of the Heritage Foundation, which started with the Powell people in the 70s and extended to right till Project 2025 and worse. And a key part of this, and it's not just here, it's in a dozen other countries as well, is corporate leadership. Call it an oligarchy, call it what you want. Corporate leadership that basically feels government is too influenced by the people, too influenced by issues of public welfare, and is too much involved in regulation, too much involved in control, too much involved, and they want the government off the back. one of the primary motives, now I don't care about Trump personally, but one of the primary motives of the key people in his Treasury Department and his Budget Department are concerned with deregulating corporations, deregulating banks, basically cutting out public programs that are for the good of the people, and changing extending and changing the tax structure so there's more for the rich and less for everybody else. How we overcome that is a crucial part. And and if we don't focus on an educational effort around that issue, that of seeing the government as a positive force rather than a negative force, to the controllers of the big corporations and what have you, they see government as a negative. All it does is put up regulations and control them. They want them off that. What was one of the first things they did? End the Consumer Protection Group organization that we got in. They don't want the consumers protected from them. They want free reign over the consumers. I mean, there is a war going on here, and to not acknowledge that war exists is really doing ourselves harm. We're going to have to somehow decide, how do we mount a campaign to convince the American people that the government is part of the solution? You know, Reagan's comment that the government's the problem, not the solution, has stuck with us. And it isn't just ideology; it is self-interest on the part of the large corporations. And I must say, I do not have a way of attacking this. Ironically, one that has been suggested to me by somebody else when I was involved in the discussion about this was, Trump might be even a possibility of this. He wants to be seen as a savior. He wants to be seen as, being totally, unconventional. He's willing to reverse himself on a dime. Maybe we should try to sell the idea of a national infrastructure to bank to Trump. That Trump can be the big savior and save the American economy by instituting this bank and doing all this sort of stuff. We may have to get to that, because obviously the Republican Party is so afraid of Trump. If he's opposed to it, they're not going to go for it.
Yeah, Andy, let me just say this, because we're running out of time for this session. But the next Zoom call on May 29th is going to address the shift from FDR into neoliberalism. And this is something that we might want to take up during that session. I think Stephen wants to say anything, but this is too much a can of worms to open into this segment. So Stephen, did you want to say something?
I do. I want to say one quick thing. I want to thank him for bringing that point up, because I think the most fundamental thing, I keep saying embrace the power of good government. I think the most fundamental thing that must occur is the public financing of all campaigns. That's, to me, the solution.
Yay.
So you've given us all a lot to think about. As Angela pointed out, we're going to have another Zoom call on May 29 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to discuss these other political things. From my perspective, and talking with people all across the country, one thing I noticed is there's a different tenor among Republican and Democratic local legislators who are more directly accountable to their voters than there is at the congressional level. They understand infrastructure needs. You can sell this bank on infrastructure needs. You can sell it based on new jobs. And if we can get the bank passed, we may need a catastrophic downturn in the economy to get everybody to sign on to it. But and we should be prepared. But that's what we're doing right now. We're preparing a backup plan. This is our plan B. It's also our plan A, and we can sell it all across the country. And legislators know this. That's why they go to their members of Congress. That's why they've introduced 30 state resolutions in 30 different legislators. 8 of them passed. Huge cities have passed resolutions in favor of the NIB. Los Angeles, San Francisco, Philly, the list goes on and on. You can see all the endorsements on our webpage. Anybody that's new to the bank, I suggest they go to our webpage. You want to pull up the slides, Angela? The NIB, nibcoalition.com to get more materials. If you would like to help with this, this is Stephen's contact information. If you want to talk to him more about the NIB, feel free. There's lots and lots of lessons to learn, and we're using a lot of what he described in his books to move this bank forward. We really want it to be modeled on the RFC. Go ahead to the next one. And then, since we covered this one already, if you would like to get if you were signed on to this Zoom call, you will be automatically invited to the next one, where we have some great speakers lined up to talk about these things. And if you would like to help, this is a grassroots campaign. Our little coalition runs on a shoestring. You can make a donation that would be very helpful, but you can also download flyers, go to town hall meetings, ask both Democrats and Republicans, how are you going to fix this basic economic problem? And here's a way to do it. And, talk up the National Infrastructure Bank as a way to fix our economy and help to get keep asking your legislators, what is your plan? What is your plan to fix the economy right now? And it could get worse. So email and sign up to be on our mailing list. And we would love to have your support. This is all hands on deck. All of those congressmen who signed on the bill were approached. We approached by voters in districts to go to their district representative, then to go to their member of Congress to get on the bill. So there's a way to move it forward. That's the strategy, the one that's proven to work. The bank has proven to work. It's a tried and true vehicle for stressful times. We would love to have you join our grassroots coalition. You can, in every area, you can do something. We have one lady in Pennsylvania. There she is right there, Ingrid. She's a master at setting up calls and talking to legislators to convince them about the bill. So that's what she does all day long. And you can do the same in your state and your area as well. So we would welcome you to participate. This is the only way that we can see to solve our basic problems. Low growth, high income inequality. We need to fix wages. We need to make housing more affordable, all of those things. Make sure that when you turn the light switch on, it goes on. So this is the way to do it. And we would love to have your participation. So with that, I'll wrap up. And again, if you were on this call, we'll invite you to the next one. Please become a member. Good evening, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.